Hello my friends, and welcome back to Garhdo Goes Geek. I know that I've been away for a while, but a recent film I saw has spurred me to come back earlier than I had planned in order to discuss it. And that film is Iron Lung, a cosmic sci-fi horror film adapted from a video game, but something I hadn't heard of at all until shortly before I saw it. However, since seeing it, I have been absolutely captivated by this film, and so I wanted to talk about it and explain a bit more about it and why it has stuck with me in the way that it has. So, let's get into it. So, firstly, what is Iron Lung? Iron Lung is a video game by David Szymanski, an indie developer who is perhaps best known for his shooter Dusk. The game is a simulation game, and you control and pilot a small rusty submarine to explore an ocean of blood, to document several points of interest marked on your map. You play as a convict who has been sealed inside this submarine, and your only way to see outside is via a manual camera that takes still pictures of whatever is in front of the sub. Now, as you play through the game, you can head to any of the 10 total points of interest in any order, but at the moment that you arrive at the 10th marked location and go to use the camera, the back of the submarine is destroyed by a large monster, bursting in and ending the game with the player's death. The sub will also deteriorate as you play, as it runs out of oxygen and eventually starts filling with blood. However, this is all scripted and poses no danger to the player. There is briefly a fire that the player will have to put out. The points of interest in the game are structures found under the blood ocean, including a skeleton, a mysterious light, walls that look like buildings, organic-looking tubes, and there are also several unmarked points, such as the eye of an enormous creature and a wrecked submarine. Finding some of these secrets can unlock entries on a terminal within the submarine that give lore about this world and what is actually going on. In this reality, something called the Quiet Rapture has occurred. Every planet and star has disappeared. All that remains of humanity is the population of several ships and space stations, and the discovery of the moons with the blood oceans has been the first evidence of a planetoid since the Quiet Rapture, and the oceans are entirely human blood. Two factions remain fighting over the final resources, the Consolidation of Iron and Eden. Eden is a space station that has the last trees known to exist in its interior garden, and after a 9-day battle against the COI, they left Filament Station uninhabitable. The player convict was captured after that battle and sent on this mission as a way of earning their freedom. The player can, however, find a note from a previous convict who was sent on a mission in this sub, however, who describes the mission not as an expedition, but as an execution, hinting at much more going on. But it is the destroyed sub that provides the most interesting clues as to what is going on, as this was built specifically by the COI to explore the blood ocean, staffed with a crew of scientists, and yet it lies on the floor of the ocean, looking as though it has been torn in half. Now, I learned everything about the game after learning about the film, and I only watched footage of it after seeing the film for the first time. As you can see, it is a very interesting, yet very little is explained, and that seems to be by design. The blood ocean seems to be inspired by the similar SCP-354, described as a pool of human-like blood that is home to several aggressive creatures. The Quiet Rapture and the divide between the COI and Eden is simply a backdrop and not part of the plot of the game, beyond explaining who you are and why you are there. And in fact, the terminal which reveals the lore, I don't believe was part of the game originally, being added in a later update. The YouTuber Markiplier became a notable fan of this game after playing it on his channel, however, announcing in April 2023, about a year after the release of the game, that he would be working on a film adaptation of Iron Lung and that he would self-finance the film after writing the script himself. This announcement was accompanied by a trailer that showed the real set of the sub from the film, accompanied by the introductory audio from the video game. David Szymanski, who had joked previously in February 2023 that Markiplier and fellow YouTuber Jacksepticeye would create a film based on the game, confirmed that he had been involved since pre-production and had helped with the script. Markiplier would go on to star in, direct, and co-produce the film, and Szymanski and Jacksepticeye would both have cameos in the film. The soundtrack to the film was also the first film score by Andrew Husholt, who has done the soundtrack for Szymanski's Dusk, as well as the IDKFA soundtrack for the latest port of the classic Doom and Doom 2. And his involvement had also been teased by Szymanski's February post. Now, I like Markiplier, but I have not been an active follower of his for some time, having missed things that he did, such as the Unus Annus experiment, which I would have loved to have been part of had I known about it previously. And so as a result, I again missed this announcement. And so I only heard of the film for the first time right near the end of last year, when I saw an announcement on a Facebook ad from the Cineworld chain that they had picked up Iron Lung after a fan campaign and were going to be showing it. This announcement came with a blurb of the film, which drew focus to the Quiet Rapture and the fact that a convict had been sent in a submarine to explore an ocean of blood, and a trailer of Markiplier's character emerging from a large body of blood in front of a stormy red sky, while a voice read the note found in the game. I had very little clue what to make of what I had learned, but I knew immediately that I wanted to know more, and so that is where I found out about the original game and Markiplier's involvement. But I decided to go in as spoiler-free as I could, knowing that regardless of what Iron Lung was, it seemed strange and unusual, and something that interested me greatly. And so I booked a ticket for opening night, I saw the film, and I immediately felt the need to know more, diving down the rabbit hole, watching Markiplier's Let's Play of the game, reading theories, and learning everything I could. So let's talk a bit more about the film, shall we? So I'm going to describe the first part of this as spoiler-free as possible, and save my spoiler discussion and theories for a bit later, because what I want to do most of all is encourage you to watch this film if you haven't, and ideally to do so legally, as I believe that this is an incredibly interesting film that is very much worth a watch and provides a slow burn approach to its horror aspects that is absent in a lot of big modern horror films, in my experience. The film takes place entirely in the Iron Lung submersible, the jury-rigged submarine where Markiplier's character of Simon is imprisoned, and very little about the character is instantly revealed to us, as we don't even learn his name until about halfway through the film. The only exposition at the start is a brief description of the Quiet Rapture and a hint that the blood ocean on this moon is important, with its secrets being hidden by the COI. All of the information that I am about to explain is drip-fed through the film, and in a lot of cases needs to be put together from context clues, things said by characters in the film or revealed from documents inside the sub. Now, I fully admit that this style of storytelling may not be for everyone, but it is something that I found fascinating. And by paying attention to the things that were said or shown, it's possible to piece things together that you aren't outright told, but very much seem to be the case. However, some of that extends into the spoiler discussion, so I'll get to that later. So, Simon is a former member of Eden and is now a prisoner of the COI, blamed for the destruction of Filament Station, part of which has been used in the construction of the submarine that he is in. He is told that he is the first convict being sent below the surface of the Blood Ocean on the moon AT5, and that if he completes the mission to photograph the points of interest on his map, he will go free. He finds a large skeleton of an unknown creature on the ocean floor, and so rises to a depth where he can communicate with the ship that launched him to tell them. And they recover him to fit him with a device to take a sample of the skeleton. However, as the commander Ava and her crew ignore Simon and talk about the mission, he activates the camera, revealing that it is actually a highly powerful X-ray device which has just irradiated the crew. He is sent back down to collect the sample, but the skeleton has moved. The entire time he is in the submarine, it gets hot with lots of visible condensation, and soon the occasional drop of blood starts to seep in as well. Seeing a figure in the corner of the sub, he discovers a broken terminal marked with Eden's symbol, and a note telling him to cross the wires, which he does, repowering it and delivering an audio message from a previous convict, as well as a resin talisman containing a cutting of the last tree, something inside Eden that holds great meaning to him. Simon eventually finds the skeleton and communicates with Ava, who tells him to ram it to collect the sample. But Simon warns that there may be something alive, but he does as he is told, wanting to live and wanting his freedom, only to then be knocked unconscious by something outside jostling the submarine. He awakens far outside the markers of the map he had, being watched by a monster outside the sub, which he seems to scare off with the camera. He repairs the submarine and bandages his wounds, finding the black box in a crawl space underneath his seat. He tries to explore and find his way back to the map he has, and locates the wreck of the SM-8. And his terminal tries to link up to it to download its black box, but he lacks the credentials to do so. He then hears another voice over his speaker, which is actually coming from someone else under the ocean, and while he initially thinks he is hallucinating, he soon believes the voice and sets out to rescue the woman talking. Going any further would really start to delve into spoiler territory, but what is there is a slow build that indicates that something dangerous and very unusual is happening under this ocean of blood, and what follows builds very quickly on what I have explained here, leading to a very gory and explosive conclusion. More than that, there is also plenty of elaboration on things that merely serve as backstory in the game. We hear more about Eden and what they believe, and how Simon regrets the destruction of Filament Station, saying that it shouldn't have happened, and a flashback seems to suggest that Simon lost friends there as well. We see much more of the monster, which has a very different design to the one in the game. We get a sense of how important the last tree is to the people of Eden. with Simon even having a tattoo of it that the COI removed. And we learn more of the SM-8 and its mission and the eventual fate of what happened to the researchers on board. But like I said, that is all verging onto spoilers. However, what I do want to highlight here is the filmmaking. This is Markiplier's directorial debut, and he stars as Simon, as well as having written the script himself. And the film focuses entirely on Simon inside the sub. The sub is a fully realized set, and yes, it does undergo some changes in the duration of the film, but it's a small location, and yet, as well as Markiplier, production designer Iman Korbani, set builder Gabriel Dua, and director of photography Philip Roy have worked together to get the most out of that set. Shots are filmed in a variety of ways with a variety of different lenses. Some shots of Simon working the controls of the submarine are done in extreme close-up, as are the shots of condensation on the pipes. Simon is framed in direct shots or filmed from cameras inside the speaker or above or below him. Maybe he isn't directly in the shot at all, merely being reflected in the glass porthole at the front of the sub or in the camera screen as the image fades. Every shot, every edit, every choice made is deliberate and has meaning, and what all of this amounts to is a film that seems strange and claustrophobic, with a single location that feels very real and familiar, yet never stops feeling new and unusual. The set itself was also mounted on a NACMO, a device able to physically move the entire set on 6-axis, allowing Markiplier to be thrown around inside the submarine when necessary, making his struggles inside the sets feel very real. This was all set up at the Robert Rodriguez-founded Troublemaker Studios in Texas, lending a strong mark of quality to the production. It all makes for a visually interesting and very competent debut directorial effort, and it makes me very happy that this was made outside of the studio system that dominates Hollywood, as I have no doubt at all that a big studio would have destroyed this in an edit by forcing cuts and changes and additions to ramp up the tension and the fear factor, when what is already here works perfectly for what is intended. While Markiplier definitely has my attention as a scriptwriter and director, however, I am less sold on him as a leading actor. Now, not that he was bad, or that his normal online persona created a disconnect in my mind, as he's perfectly serviceable here in the role that he is in, and I think he carries the film fine enough. But on some minor occasions, I just felt something was lacking, even if I couldn't put my finger on what that was. However, the entire package of the presentation carries any flaws, in my opinion, and I've happily seen this film twice already, and I look forward to seeing it again when I get the chance. In fact, the biggest criticism I have seen against the film is a comment about how slow-paced it is. But for me, as I said, that's something that works, and the conclusion more than makes up for that delicate pace. The writing is solid throughout, and the slow burn really works before things get crazy, with plenty of great clues and setup done very gradually, but there if you're paying attention. This film holds the record for the most fake blood used on any production, using 300,000 litres, over 100,000 litres more than what was used in 2013's Evil Dead, which was the previous record holder. So you know that the conclusion is a suitable gore fest that would please any horror aficionado. But to me, that payoff feels all the more deserved after the subtle build, as the first few drips slowly make their way into the sub, all shot in the delicate and claustrophobic close-up. And everything else I will discuss later is the same. The time we spend in that cramped sub with Simon, learning alongside him about the other convicts, seeing his frustration at his situation, his desire to be free, and his growing fear and uncertainty about the monster out in the blood ocean, is all necessary for the conclusion to hit in the way that it does, I think. And of course, all of that is punctuated by Andrew Hirscholt's fantastic score, which, while not lacking in bombast when it is needed, serves as a subtle backing for the strange goings-on inside the Iron Lung, with it growing more discordant as Simon's mental state starts to unravel. I also want to praise the concept artist for the monster, Deadly Melodic, on Instagram, who has revealed the concepts for the creature on her page, allowing for a great look at this monster that allows us to guess much more about it, but I'll get more into that later on. One final thing I also like is that he credited himself as Markiplier rather than his birth name of Mark Fishback, as it's a way of proudly signifying that he's proud of his YouTube roots, as that is what has led to this. And he has explained that that is why he did so much of this film himself, including building a render farm to attempt previs on visual effects, as that is just the way that he is used to making his content. But as much as the film interests me, I think before I get into spoilers, I think I need to discuss something else. And that is the film's unusual release and the success that it has seen as a result. So, as I said earlier, Iron Lung was self-financed by Markiplier to the tune of between $3 and $4 million. I have seen both figures and several in between, and I can't find a source confirming which is accurate, so let's say it is between the two. And that cost included the set, the studio hire at Troublemaker, the full production schedule, the visual effects, wages for the cast and crew, makeup, catering, and all of that glorious fake blood. So this was a proper film as opposed to an indie project. And yet, it did not do a crowdfunding campaign, even though it easily could have done with Markiplier's huge audience. It didn't seek a studio backer, which is what no doubt allowed Markiplier such creative control and freedom on the project. It also didn't have a marketing budget. Everything was done with word of mouth and announcement on Markiplier's YouTube channel. Now, it does mean that it took a while before it was released, as filming completed at the end of April 2023, with a lot of time spent on editing and post-production, which had to be suspended during the SAG-AFTRA strike due to Markiplier being a member. And the trailer was released in October 2023. In fact, Iron Lung being this labour of love even led to Markiplier turning down a cameo in Five Nights at Freddy's, a film based on a series that he definitely helped to popularise, as the shooting schedule conflicted. In June 2024, Markiplier announced the film was done and he began negotiating for its release, as he was determined to release it in cinemas. Now, I have my own views on filmmakers who seem to insist that their films should, quote, only be seen in cinemas, when the vast majority of the great and classic films that you will ever encounter, you are unlikely to ever see in that fashion. And I do not believe that makes them a lesser experience. But I do respect Markiplier making this decision, as he was one of the big draws on the early YouTube Red when that launched, so he could easily have just put it on his channel as either a pay-per-view film or a channel member or premium bonus, and an independent filmmaker getting to premiere their debut film in theaters is pretty dang cool. Now, the problem is that cinemas have been struggling for a while in the wake of the streaming era, with the post-COVID push by the major studios to rush their films to video on demand services. Cinemas are doing even worse. Now, this means that they are less likely to take risks, and films from the studio system, despite the problems of working with the studios, do provide bonuses to the cinemas, and most cinemas are unwilling to take a risk on a film without a studio behind it. Because if nothing else, they don't want screens sitting empty. Now, what this means is that when Markiplier reported to an expectant fan base on December the 5th, 2025, that Iron Lung had a release date and tickets were available for pre-sale, it only had a slated release in 60 independent US cinemas. And Markiplier encouraged fans to request it directly from their local cinemas. This proved to be very successful, and a grassroots word-of-mouth campaign led to it being picked up by big cinema chains such as AMC and Regal in the US. Regal even gave the film an exclusive popcorn bucket. By the time of the official release on January 30th, the film was released in 4,191 cinemas internationally, with over 2,000 of them in the United States alone, something unheard of for a film releasing without a studio distributor. In addition to that, in many of the North American cinemas, Markiplier partnered with local donation centers to bring blood donation trucks to cinemas in an attempt to break the blood drive world record of 37,018 donations. However, I can find no sources on whether this was successful or not, but it is a fantastic goal, totally worth applauding. As to the release itself, Iron Lung came out alongside some very strong competition, including the Sam Raimi directed Send Help and the Melania Bribe documentary, which it absolutely pummeled at the box office. And for a lot of that first weekend, it was also leading against Send Help until it was eventually overtaken by the Disney release. While initially projected to make about $10 million in its opening weekend, the really strong box office numbers meant that in that first weekend it made $18.2 million worldwide. In terms of reviews, it has a 60% on Rotten Tomatoes from critics, praising the visuals and atmosphere, with the pacing and Markiplier's acting being the biggest criticisms, apparently. However, the reviews did nothing to slow it down, and it has an 87% audience score. The film seems to have completed its theatrical run now and has a total box office, according to thenumbers.com, of over $50 million, making it an incredibly successful independent release. In fact, Markiplier did reveal that his deal with the cinemas essentially splits the box office 50-50 between himself and the cinemas in most cases, meaning that it has been incredibly successful for all involved, as Markiplier then went on to pay the entire crew and cast a, quote, huge bonus. And in fact, watching videos that Markiplier has released discussing the film and its success, it is clear that this film meant an awful lot to him, and its success has been hugely emotional for him. And I have to say, I think he has produced something here to be very proud of. This release has proven that independent films produced and released outside of the studio system can be not just financially viable, but hugely successful. And at a time when many big film studios seem to be strangling creativity in new ideas and wanting to play it safe with what they make, to the point of dramatic studio interference to make a film fit a particular cookie cutter mold. So seeing something so unusual become such a huge success is hopefully a huge shot in the arm to filmmaking. And as fellow YouTuber H Bomber Guy wrote in his review of the film on Letterboxd, it's just good. It's a nice reminder there's a ton of really good movies out there worth looking for, and a lot still waiting to be made. And I have to agree. This feels like a film that would have been a successful cult film even without Markiplier's built-in audience. The sort of film that you would hear about 10 years after release on the recommendation of the guy that you know that is just a huge film fan with an enormous DVD collection who insists that you should check it out. And if you haven't seen it, then I hope that I have been that guy for you and prompted you to see this film on its inevitable home release, either digitally or Markiplier is hoping to get this released on DVD and Blu-ray. And I think if you haven't seen it, then that is when to pick it up. And I personally am hoping that that sort of release comes with plenty of bonus features such as making of, behind the scenes, production diaries, and especially any commentaries and discussions, as I really want to learn more about this film. And I can tell some of this has been filmed, and I have no doubt that this is what Markiplier is saving that sort of content for. Now, this will remain an independent release, so I'm sure that that will take time, but I eagerly await it. And with that said, if you haven't seen the film yet, then this is where you also may want to stop this episode, as I am about to go in depth on the third act, meaning that I will be discussing the spoilers. So if you don't want to hear those, then I wish you goodbye for now.
This is not an expedition. It's an execution. And they put you in here. They don't want you to return. And even if you do, and even if they keep their promises, what freedom waits for you? Few dying ships in a sea of dead stars. If there is still hope, it lies beyond the veil. Hope in this void is as illusionary as the starlight. I will choose to breathe my last here, at the bottom of an ocean, unseen, unheard, uncontrolled. They will get their execution. I will get my freedom.
So, the main reason why I didn't cover the third act previously is because this is where the film deviates from the game, and it begins when Simon finds the SM-8. The voice of a woman begins speaking to him, which seems to be from another person trapped in the blood ocean, and after some discussion about the Quiet Rapture, where Simon wonders if the stations that are left actually disappeared from the universe rather than the universe disappearing around them, she convinces him to head to a certain set of coordinates to learn the truth. Once there, Simon takes a photograph of the light, and the voice tells him that it has a great importance and it could hold the secrets to the Quiet Rapture, mentioning an ignorant god seeing the universe through a pinhole. His oxygen depleting and his mental state getting more desperate, Simon starts to despair. We learn that the last tree is gone, and flashback voices later suggest that the religion of Eden is that their bodies will become the soil. As he despairs, the voice then refers to Simon by name, which startles him, as he never told the voice his name, although she says he did. And at this point, Markiplier notices that the speaker is actually broken after he hit it earlier when the hull breach warning never stopped due to a crack in the porthole after the monster moved him off of the main map. The voice suddenly turns more sinister, with a second voice joining it, saying that he needs to go into the light to learn the truth, getting aggressive with him before the monster returns, pushing the sub into the light, which begins to pour in through the cracked porthole, allowing the monster and Simon to see each other, with the light also injuring the monster. Simon suddenly surfaces on the top of the ocean of blood, without the sub, watching the monster dive back beneath the waves nearby, and he looks up to see an eye in a stormy red sky looking down on him, with his last tree talisman trapped by a vine reaching out beneath the waves. Simon then finds himself back in the sub, vomiting blood, the speaker repaired, and after seeing a brief vision of a one-armed, bloody humanoid creature in the cockpit, he then talks to Ava, who reveals that he has been missing for days and that they can't rescue him. However, when he mentions that he found the SMA and can download its black box, she changes her tune, saying that if he can get it, she will rescue him herself, confirming that he will go free and giving Simon the clearance he will need to do it. And the two of them finally introduce themselves to each other by name. He gets underway, however the sub begins to start noticeably taking on more blood, almost as though the submarine itself is bleeding. Gore and ichor starts to congeal on the walls, and more liquid blood starts to seep in. The oxygen even seems to recover, raising its meter. Simon himself then notices that his own wounds are blistering and bloody, and a drop of blood on his head causes him pain, making him take notice of the deteriorating condition of the sub, as bloody growths grow over the camera button, keeping it flashing every few seconds. As the black box of SM8 is downloaded, he realizes the voice that spoke to him before was the head researcher of the SM8, and that the crew had been stranded, using a device to extract water from the human blood of the ocean, but it was having a dangerous effect upon them, and that something happened to them as a result. The voice he heard seems to have been the monster or the ocean itself. He rushes to meet with Ava, but her sub has been caught by the monster, who holds it in its mouth in front of the camera as she desperately communicates with Simon, saying she wished she could free him as he deserves it, but all that matters is the data from the black box, as what is on it could save humanity. As the monster's voice starts to taunt him, it destroys Ava's sub, and Ava's voice also joins the monster's, turning on him as well. Simon first rams the sub into the monster's other eye, blinding it, and then sets the sub into reverse and wades through the blood pooling in the crawl space to rescue the black box, which he ties to a life jacket. The monster the whole time chasing him, demanding to know what he saw, taunting him and saying that none can be allowed to see the light again as it pursues the sub. Heading back to the controls, he gets his arms caught on the fleshy matter on the pipes as the sub lurches, hitting something that stops its motion. He rests one hand free in great pain, but fleshy matter crawls over his body, and the act of getting free rips his left arm off at the shoulder, leaving him resembling the creature he saw earlier. Blood touches the sapling in the cracked talisman, causing a spark, which is also seen in Simon's eye. As the monster closes in and grabs the sub in its jaws, the blood inside now waist high, Simon sabotages the sub, causing it to implode when the monster bites it, destroying the monster as well. In the first exterior shot that shows the end of the monster and the iron lung sub, it seems that a tree is sprouting from the sub in the midst of its destruction. The last shot of the film is the life jacket wrapped black box, bobbing on the surface of the blood ocean, being found by what we presume to be a COI ship above. So, as you can see, a hell of a lot happens in a very short amount of time, and this fast pace works fantastically with the slow and deliberate tension of the first 2/3 of the film. Markiplier did a recent interview with YouTube, which was published on their blog and which I will link below, in that he says the start of the film is the setup, saying, quote, "The point is the monotony, the loneliness, the boredom. You can't cut that and still be genuine to what the game was trying to accomplish." And I think he's completely right. The pace quickens as the film draws to its conclusion, with everything from Simon entering the light happening at a steadily increasing clip, with a large amount of revelations being made to the audience, answering a lot of the intrigue built up beforehand, but never in a way that completely satisfies. And that works for me. The film's mysteries feel like something we aren't supposed to fully comprehend. It's the very definition of cosmic horror, humanity small and insignificant in the face of incomprehensible horrors beyond any rational understanding, a term that could apply equally to the monster, the light, the blood ocean, or even the Quiet Rapture. And so with such unknowable concepts and only half answers provided in the feature itself, all we are left with is theorizing. And I do love me some theory crafting, but I also think the film provides more than enough clues as to what is going on to get a solid idea of some aspects of the plot, at least. Firstly, it seems that the blood ocean, or at least the monster inside it, which seems to be made of human elements as well, according to the full render of the creature, seems to be incorporating elements of its victims and is sentient, choosing to communicate with Simon directly. We see this when we learn that the SM8 researcher is the source of the main voice that we heard previously, with the SM8 assistant as a secondary voice, and it's confirmed when Ava's voice joins it after her death. The voice of the monster also seems to come over the speaker when it first speaks to Simon, but the speaker is missing the light we saw when anyone else communicated with Simon, which is our first clue that something is amiss. Not only is it sentient, but it seems to turn on Simon after he enters the light, with it being much more aggressive after he was returned, wanting to prevent others seeing it, despite encouraging Simon to see it and even pushing him inside it. It seems that the monster was born inside the SM-8, with the research lead and her assistant being combined, erupting out of it as a result to the changes that drinking the water from the blood ocean was having on them, which there is evidence for in the SM-8 log, as well as the damage to the SM-8 itself, and it is definitely supported by the human elements of the creature in Deadly Melodic's designs, as well as later being confirmed by word of God by the creature designer after someone on Reddit reached out to them. The monster even apologizes to Ava before destroying her, saying, "We're sorry," suggesting a connection between the SM-8 crew that formed it and her. It could perhaps be that the whole moon of 85 itself is alive, as the tunnels Simon explores resemble internal bodily structures, leading him to mark his map as alien shit. The floor of the ocean seems to move and be unstable, and a sound almost like a heartbeat can be heard when first descending into the ocean, something Simon draws attention to. It seems that the ocean itself also starts to affect the sub as it starts to transform towards the end of Simon's mission, with the blood less leaking into the sub at the end of the film, but almost seeming to be generated by it as the submarine seems to transform into an organic being, with the injury it causes to Simon almost seeming like it is trying to consume him. A similar transformation could also be happening to Simon himself, who gets hit by some blood harmlessly earlier in the film, before any of the bizarre things that start to happen. Before he sees his first apparition, before the injuries he sustains, before he hears the voices and sees the vision. The question could be how much of what Simon is experiencing is actually real. I mean, Ava says to him his oxygen should have run out, and we know that the camera emits large amounts of radiation, with a page warning that this could even affect the cabin. And there is obviously the heat inside of the sub, which could also be a side effect of the radiation, which would also cause Simon's blistering wounds and puking up blood. And he downs some rubbing alcohol, which probably also doesn't help his state. So, is Simon just dying slowly, or are the strange things he experiences actually real? What about the people he sees inside the sub? The figure ducking around the corner leads to him finding the terminal, and echoes how he ducks around it later when he sees the one-armed creature, a creature that resembles the wounds that he sustains by the end of the film. Is he seeing echoes of the future? And if he is it being caused by the blood ocean? After all, one instance leads him to the terminal, which makes him take more notice of SM-8, leading to the voice talking to him for the first time. However, I don't think the second vision leads to anything that helps him in a similar way, and it seems to not be accurate with his apparent death. Although, when he makes contact with Ava again, we see that everything he went through in the tunnels seems to have been genuine, as the new map that he created remains, and the eye still seems to be watching him through the blood that he vomits up. And then there's the light itself and the vision of the eye in the red void. It's perhaps the most pivotal scene in the film, and we have very few, if any, answers for it, both in the film and from the filmmakers. The only thing confirmed is that the eye is a different entity to the monster. And the area it seems to inhabit is the Red Void, an other dimensional space beyond the blood ocean Simon is exploring on 85. There are few words in the scene. Simon doesn't communicate. The eye simply names him and refers to him by its title of Butcher. And the monster leaves after uttering, "We are all one in the blood." The most notable part of it, except for the visual, is when Simon tries to move his arm, seeing that the talisman he wears of the last tree sapling is stuck beneath the surface of the blood that he is in, which may or may not be connected to or completely separate from the blood ocean on 85, seemingly held by tree roots. And there is an implication that this has something to do with why Simon is released. In fact, he wears this talisman on his left arm, the same arm that is ripped off by the organic matter in the submarine towards the conclusion, as though something in the ocean is trying to claim the remnants of the last tree. The monster's reaction also tells us a lot, seeming to imply that any others the monsters sent into the light have not come back, or at least not come back unscathed, as SM8's research log seems to make reference to the light and the eye. But if the theory is true that they mutated and became the monster, then Simon may be the first person they exposed to the light, but that they could not add to them, causing the rage that they show towards him, wanting to know what the eye saw in Simon that made him different, and which seems to turn the monster against the light as it yells at Simon towards the conclusion, demanding to know what the light saw in him, that the light must be forgotten, that the eye wants Simon to do this, and that the madness must end with Simon. It seems apparent to me that if anything was different, that it must be the last tree talisman, simply due to how much attention is drawn to it in that scene. In fact, the fact that a tree seems to appear in the sub is destroyed suggests that maybe Simon was transformed into one by the eye, his body and the monsters literally becoming the soil. And this all goes back to something that was raised by the voice about the origins of the Quiet Rapture itself, and something that the eye seems to reinforce. The full quote is, "Do you believe in God? An ignorant God sees a sliver of our universe through a pinhole and thinks it understands all that is and all that will be. And it will, because a God makes sense of what it sees despite what it should be. The light, it illuminates, it blinds, it thinks, and therefore we are." The eye is the ignorant God. The light is the pinhole. The eye has removed what it can't see, causing the Quiet Rapture. And there's even a scene earlier on that seems to reinforce this, when Simon, not understanding Ava and David, his vision limited by the porthole and his voice being ignored, activates the camera, hurting everyone in the room, drawing parallels with what the eye seems to have done to the universe. Now, Simon does offer an alternate interpretation of the Quiet Rapture, that the spaceships and stations that remain of humanity have been taken from the universe rather than the universe being taken from them. And that's also an interesting idea, but it doesn't seem to conflict with what the voice suggests, namely that the eye has changed the universe somehow, and in trying to understand what it can see has caused the Quiet Rapture. And if the Red Void is the world of the eye, as it seems to be, then the creation of 85 and the Blood Ocean seems to suggest the Eye trying to make sense of it, making something in our universe that matches what it understands. This then suggests that the encounter the Eye had with Simon, due to the last tree, has allowed the Eye to learn of something new, and is now trying to understand this, which may change the universe again and may even undo the Quiet Rapture eventually. We will never know. All we know is that everything that Simon experienced and learned was recorded on the black box and that it was found, meaning that whatever the answers to any of these mysteries, the remnants of humanity can investigate them, just as we investigate the film and the lore. For my part, I like that the answers aren't clear and concrete. I think that this is the perfect type of story that benefits from a lack of answers, as it's not necessarily the right choice for every story, but it's definitely the right choice here. The whole concept of the Blood Ocean, the Quiet Rapture, the monster, the voice, the Eye in the Red Void, etc. It's all cosmic horror, mysterious, unknowable, beyond our understanding. And so that is where the answers should remain, I think. So, thank you for joining me for this episode, my friends. It's been a lot of fun to sit and create something again, and while this wasn't an episode I was planning to make, the film just wormed its way into my brain in a way that meant I just couldn't ignore it, and so I had to write an episode. And now that I have the spark back in me, I am hoping to keep feeding it, to keeping that spark lit. So if you have seen Iron Lung, I would love to hear what you thought of it and what theories you have on the concepts it presents. Also, since writing the majority of this episode, I have learned that David Szymanski is apparently planning another entry in the Quiet Rapture universe, but not a direct sequel to Iron Lung, and I am very excited to see what that could look like and what further mysteries it could give us. I'm also very much interested to see the potential future of Markiplier's film career, whatever that could entail. However, in the meantime, I want you all to do the very best to look after yourselves, my friends. Take the best care as you can of both your physical and mental health. Reach out for support if you need it, because you deserve support and people do care about you. I will talk to you all again very soon. Until next time, my friends. Thank you for joining us here at Garhdo Goes Geek. Your support of this podcast means the absolute world to me, and I am grateful to everyone who listens. If you wish to engage more with myself and my co-hosts, we have a few other ways to do this. Firstly, if you go to the link tree linked in the description, you'll find links not just to this podcast on every platform, but also to our Discord server, where you can interact directly with all of us, and a link to a dedicated subreddit for this podcast. There is also a link to a supporting Blogspot page, where I'll be posting supporting material for this podcast, including progress updates, schedules, and watch orders for the content I cover should you wish to watch along with me. I also have a link to a Spotify playlist featuring some of the music items I've discussed in the podcast. You can also add me on Facebook if you so wish, or follow on Twitch, where I'll be hosting a weekly stream. Finally, there is also a link in there to Ko-Fi, where you have the option to leave a one-time tip if you so wish, or alternatively to commission your own podcast episode. So if there is a topic you would like me to cover that I have yet to do so, then you can request I cover it for a small sponsorship fee. However, if you do not have the means to do so, then all I ask is that if you could please like, subscribe, and share this podcast with anyone else you think may like it. I love you all. Until next time, bye for now.